Right, so yesterday there was a Westminster Hall debate on Brexit. Yes, we're back to that one again, and the need for an inquiry into it, how it's going. And this was instigated off the back of a petition calling for the government to hold a public inquiry and produce an impact assessment of the effects of Brexit on the country. Now, the petition had passed the 100,000 signatures mark, so this meant Parliament had to debate the matter. The public have demanded it of them, and this threshold is the mandate needed to force that to happen. And so it did yesterday. 3 hours of debate, and it might actually surprise you, this hasn't actually happened before. This is actually the first time that the consequences of leaving the EU have been debated. However you voted, I'm not going to imply you did so one way or the other without good intentions, but that hasn't necessarily been the case from those who sold it to us, from the lies told on the sides of buses, for example, to actual corruption going on, the vote leave court cases, Carole Cadwalladr's victory in exposing that, and so on and so forth. That is the past, though. That has happened. That has gone. It's what has happened as a result of that decision to leave, and what we do now going forwards that actually does matter. And that was the crux of the debate. The government's statement off the back of the petition passing that 100,000 signature threshold, which was actually back in December of last year, was that leaving the EU was a democratic choice and the UK EU institutions are functioning as intended. The government does not believe this to be an appropriate subject for a public inquiry. Well, public thought otherwise, didn't they? At least enough of them did. The word functioning is doing some pretty heavy lifting there too. As for a public inquiry, well, we've had one over a much more recent set of events, of course, haven't we? The pandemic. Why could we have a public inquiry into that, which has happened more recently, yet not Brexit itself? Again, it comes down to the Tory Party putting itself first, and democracy be damned. The whole Brexit debacle was started by David Cameron, of course, as a means to settle the European divides in his party. This has failed. They're still arguing about it, but can you imagine how bad it'd get if anyone in government remotely mooted the thought of reopening the wound again? Not a chance. A weakling like Sunak, holding on to his job as he is by keeping alliances of various factions together, would risk that. The Tories will never hold a public inquiry into Brexit unless made to, and given the lack of any, and I mean any, Brexit benefit due to how they've handled the issue. They're wrecking the country as a result and can only ever continue to do so. It's not like they haven't tried to sell us some successes, though, eh? They really have tried. Ending freedom of movement, that was a big one they cheered about, wasn't it? Stop those pesky foreigners coming over here and stealing our jobs. Well, we've lost them instead, haven't we? Tens of thousands of vacancies in the NHS, reliant on migrant workers as we are in our health service, rendering it more and more unsafe. Waiting lists counted in the millions. Crops rotting in our fields, amounting to an estimated 7 billion meals wasted last year because there wasn't enough people here to pick them. Farmers have cited Brexit as the cause, and that lack of fruit and veg pickers. 40% of National Farmers Union members lost crops. Look at the prices of fresh produce when you go shopping, and remember, shortages drive demand, and demand drives prices upwards. We're all paying for this one as well. Remember the likes of Rees-Mogg or Jeremy Hunt telling us food prices would be cheaper once we Brexited. Hasn't happened, has it? Our average grocery bill has risen by an average of £210. That was the assessment over the year 2020 to 2021, incidentally, immediately after Brexit, so he carried on, entirely due to the increases in red tape required to import fresh produce from the EU. That was all according to the London School of Economics, and they have said it's entirely down to Brexit. It's not the war in Ukraine, it is not the pandemic or anything else. Remember those tomato shortages we had not long ago, the rationing of tomatoes and cucumbers? They blamed Spanish weather, didn't they? All the EU shops had them, though. Easier to sell what Spain had to countries without the red tape, wasn't it? And so we were the country that went without. Eat turnips instead, Therese Coffey cried. We don't even grow enough of them ourselves anymore because they aren't financially worth it. We were importing those too. And she really ought to have known that, not just because she's in charge of DEFRA, but because most of the turnips in this country are grown in her constituency, apparently. Or were. Ending freedom of movement also saw the end of the Erasmus scheme for students to travel and study throughout Europe too, because it wasn't just the freedom of EU nationals that was stopped from coming here, but also our freedom here to go elsewhere too. Taking back control, they told us, but it turned out to be just about locking doors. There are still people who want to come here to do these jobs that we have massive shortages in. As increasingly unattractive as that has become, they still want to come, yet still the door remains closed. No tariffs, no red tape. We were told that, yet that was also another government lie. And a lie that, again, locked doors in our faces, as just as students had barriers put in their way, so did businesses, unable to trade as efficiently with the EU, all the certificates, all the export paperwork. It just made trade with the EU even harder. Again, the country was lied to about this by Johnson because he lies more easily than he draws breath. Where businesses could trade with the EU easily before, where they were used to benefiting from pan-European trade without barriers, now they can't, and still are finding it a lot harder to keep trading, dealing with the new rules they were suddenly subject to. One assessment of the economic impact was by the Centre for Economic Reform, and they've calculated the UK has lost out on £40 billion in tax revenue due to the sheer amount of lost business, all due to Brexit, and only Brexit. It's no wonder when you hear this and you look at the recent IMF growth figures, for example, that were published, that UK growth is expected to basically be in recession, coming in behind even sanction-hit Russia. Well, it's not surprising, really, when you think of Brexit in terms of sanctioning ourselves. Our government, these Tories, to keep themselves together and in government, have imposed sanctions on every one of us all, based on the lies and dishonesty of Boris Johnson and those hard Brexiteer acolytes of his. Not only get platformed far too often in interviews, but some even get given their own TV shows now. The propaganda machine for Brexit seems to be ramping up all the more as the country keeps on going economically south as a result. Of course, those Brexit types keep telling us the benefits will be there in the long term. We just have to wait a little longer. But long-term OBR forecasts are saying we'll be around 15% worse off long-term instead. So how long is long-term in the heads of the likes of Rees-Mogg and Jeremy Hunt? Still, Brexiteers say we don't accept the UK will be poorer in the long run. Based on what evidence? Nobody's backing you up. Oh, we'll make new trade deals, they say. Yes, let's talk about some new trade deals for a moment, shall we? There's the Australia trade deal, isn't there? We lost 4% of GDP by flipping the bird to the EU. We're literally on our doorstep, so let's really make one heck of a carbon footprint about all this too, and instead trade with a country on the other side of the planet. And not only that, but the deal is worth just 0.08% of GDP anyway. We lose 4%, we gain 0.08%, and the Tories cheer about it. What a win! Not. Oh, there's more deals than just that one, though, isn't there? We might as well deal with New Zealand as well if we're going to travel all the way around the world and deal with Australia. We've offered them tariff-free trade for their meat, completely undercutting our own British farmers in doing so. The Tories really don't like us producing anything, do they? Have the Tories offered them anything for threatening their livelihoods? Not a sodding thing. Our meat farmers are going to get undercut by that deal. Our fruit and veg farmers are watching their produce rot in their fields. All after manufacturing, of course, has been binned off and privatised ever since Thatcher cursed the country with her presence. What literally are we left with here? Farmers, seriously, you have a reputation for voting Tory, but genuinely, why after all of this would you keep on doing so? And then, of course, there's the latest deal, the mouthful acronym. I've got to warm myself up for this one. That is CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Transatlantic Pan-Pacific Partnership. Try saying that one 3 times fast, or before running out of breath. It's going to unlock the benefits of Brexit, we're told. Again, we're being sold that line, benefits of Brexit. How many years have they been peddling that line now? Still waiting for that to ever happen, of course. We've heard it all before. This one, again, is another big fat Tory con, though. Remember, we've lost some £40 billion in tax revenue since we Brexited. Well, this deal, according to the government's own estimates, is worth just £1.8 billion over the next decade. It's a sick, twisted joke, and they produced a big old advert selling this one as some massive win. One more Brexit consequence of freedom of movement, it would be remiss of me to not mention as well, would be the small boats crisis. More people are coming here now than before Brexit because the inept Johnson government put no returns policy in place with the EU. So now we have to house every successful asylum applicant that comes here instead of sharing that task amongst other member states of the EU bloc. And Rishi Sunak isn't changing tack on it either. They aren't so much finding a locked door in their way. They've got keys, so to speak. Coming here with a valid asylum case means they now know they're staying here. Instead of doing a deal with the EU on this, which wouldn't require us to rejoin at all, incidentally, the Tories could still do this here and now. But they would rather do deals with the likes of Rwanda to deport these people instead, risking our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights in doing so, something the Tories seems happy to tear up if needs be, which again is all of our basic rights as well, going in the bin too for them to deliver that. That day is coming. Suella Braverman's illegal migrants bill is itself almost certain to be found to be illegal by the EU, found to be in violation of the Human Rights Convention and the Refugees Convention, because deporting them elsewhere isn't taking responsibility for them, is it? The Tories have never run the country well, but their handling of Brexit has made it substantially worse. Aside from food shortages and the rising cost of food anyway, the inflation of which is around 19% right now and keeping overall inflation up at 10.1% still. We have a housing crisis. We've got mouldy buy-to-lets most of us can only afford to rent to live in, a shortage of essential workers, most notably in health, more and more people sliding into poverty, businesses going under thanks to the trading rules and regulations, and shops being boarded up with city centres on the verge of closure completely, if not for charity shops. A winter health crisis every single year and no chance of ever getting to see a GP or a dentist. Waiting lists, including for cancer patients, top 7 million. A backlog of court cases, 650,000 cases long. 560 pubs gone in the last year. Public administration is inept. Public finances are strained due to loss of revenue. And yet with 177 billionaires in the UK today, we have more of them than ever before. Pay restraint and income squeezes for the rest of us have seen strike action across all industries and all sectors, not least of which are emergency service staff. This isn't in any way a picture of a benefiting country. This is one run for the few at the expense of the many. A mess made by the rich, affecting the poorest most. And if you think I'm being harsh by pointing all of these things out, then I'll tell you, it isn't me just pointing them out. This is how the rest of the world sees us. Most of those latter points, particularly, came straight from the German magazine Der Spiegel. Brexit has done intolerable levels of damage. Our kids now face a future where they'll be worse off than we are, and the Tories don't think all of this is worth an inquiry just to see why that is. Labour under Starmer said they wanted a referendum on this until he became leader and then promptly proved he was lying, like he does about everything, and now he wants to try and make Brexit work too. No chance of going back on what the Tories have started. So far it hasn't worked. What about this has worked? And how long must we put up with it not working before we can ask to have another say on it? I've not gone to this point before. I've not reached this conclusion. We get to change our minds, though, about who runs the country, as an example, though, every 5 years. And we voted to leave the EU 7 years ago now. It's bombing. The country is in a right state. Why can we not ask the question again? Why are we being denied that right? Yes, I voted Remain, folks, but I've always been very accepting of the result up until this point. We cannot keep ignoring the fact it's causing the vast majority of people a lot of pain as a consequence of its inept delivery, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Maybe it can be fixed. Maybe somebody else coming in can take a different tack. But do you think the Tories capable after having had this long to do so? Or Starmer even? It isn't anti-democratic to ask this. It is anti-democratic to continue to ignore the people of this country suffering in the aftermath, suffering after so many years of it now. It feels like forever, doesn't it? It's anti-democratic to continue to allow that to happen whilst the rich seem to just keep getting on richer. Workers' rights are under threat, especially if we do end up pulling out of the Human Rights Act. That in turn will decimate peace in Northern Ireland, as it undermined the Good Friday Agreement. Northern Ireland now being an important trade route, let's not forget, our only land connection to the EU. Our economy has already been suffering like mad. Our environment suffers. Nobody voted for shit to be dumped like it has since we left the EU water quality legislation. But that's what the Tories have done to every single watercourse in this country. Stunk it all up and turned us into a sewer. It isn't anti-democratic to give people the right to choose between persevering with more pain and possibly no light at the end of the tunnel by all accounts, or rejoining an imperfect system where at least things were better and this country was more prosperous. At least let's say we can talk about it, which is the Green Party position right now. It's the only party open to having that conversation anymore. If rejoining is the right thing at some point down the line to fix the situations this country finds itself in, then it can't be anti-democratic to at least consider that. And it can't be wrong to at least have a conversation about it, surely, because if the only Brexit benefit any Tory can point to is something as wet and abstract as sovereignty, then we've been had. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe, leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, folks.